If you're a senior L&D professional ready to take your learning leadership to the executive level, the Training Industry Senior Leaders Program is designed for you. This elite 5-month virtual program equips you with the mindset, tools, and network to rise to the C-suite and redefine learning's role in the business. Through interactive discussions, case studies, and a high-fidelity business simulation, you'll build executive presence, financial and business acumen, and data-driven decision-making skills that will position you as a trusted business leader. Visit trainingindustry.com/senior leaders program to learn more.
Welcome to the Business of Learning, the Learning Leaders podcast from Training Industry, where we speak with industry experts and thought leaders on all things learning and development.
Hi, welcome back to the Business of Learning. I'm Michelle Eggleston-Schwartz, Editor-in-Chief here at Training Industry.
And I'm Sarah Gallo, a Senior Editor. Today we're diving into a topic that's surprisingly common in the L&D world, but often not talked about enough: imposter syndrome. Many learning professionals experience feelings of self-doubt, feeling like you're not doing or achieving enough, even when you've proven your skills and expertise. So to learn more about this challenge and how to navigate it, we are joined by Loren Sanders, a certified professional in training management and Vice President of Learning Strategy and Consulting at WeLearn Learning Services, and by Ruth Phillips, a Training and Education Senior Specialist at Higginbotham. So Loren and Ruth, welcome.
Hi. Yes, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. So to kind of kick things off and get things started, how do you define imposter syndrome? And how might it show up in an L&D professional's day-to-day work?
I'm happy to take this one first, if that works. I really look at imposter syndrome as a pattern of thoughts where very capable people are not trusting the evidence of their own effectiveness. And the way that it shows up in L&D professionals is more behaviorally than emotionally. So we don't always hear people talking about it or saying that they feel it, but we see it in over-preparing or rewriting something 10 times before we feel like it's good enough to put in front of a stakeholder, or working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And then there's an added pressure to kind of justify your role constantly because we live in total complexity all the time. You're accountable for capability. A lot of times you're accountable for culture. You're accountable for performance. But a lot of times you're accountable for things that you have zero control of. And that kind of ambiguity can really sharpen your awareness. And sometimes that awareness can manifest itself as doubt in our psyche.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I always tell people imposter syndrome is that voice in the back of your head that tells you that you're not smart enough or good enough, like you don't know what you're doing. And I see a lot of trainers and educators experience that by saying, why'd they pick me to teach this class or lead this class? There's 100 other people smarter in this room. And they are more than capable of doing it, but they have those self-doubts that they just picked me because they needed to fill a spot at the table, or so many other excuses when they picked you because you're the person to do the job. You're smart, you're capable. But sometimes we overthink and doubt ourselves so much that we don't think we are that person.
I love that you brought that up because when that thought shows up in you, it creates a certain type of behavior, right? We're behavior people, we're performance people. So think about the behavior that it creates in you when you have those feelings. And if it's making you prepare and clarify and think clearly, I want you now to think about those as leadership strengths.
Uh-huh.
I think I love that reframe.
Really important if we're able to recognize when we have those feelings and turn them into positive. I know And it shows up at weird times, and I can't even see myself doing that. And I'm like, okay, that's the crazy voice in my head, and I know it's crazy, but let me deal with it instead of reacting crazily with it. Crazily, is that a word? I don't think that's a word. But I don't want to spin out of control because of that voice. I can listen to it, I can hear it, but I want to shut it down and be like, no, I got this. I'm prepared. I've done my homework. I'm good to go.
I find it helps too if you name that voice. I have a client that calls hers Penelope, and she'll be like,
Oh,
"Shut up, Penelope," and
I
it seems to really help.
I love that. Yeah, I am. My boss knows that I struggle with imposter syndrome a lot, and I'm like, okay, this is crazy me talking now, and I know I'm crazy. Just remind me that I am not. And she laughs at me, and she doesn't like, oh no, you got this. She's like, she gives me facts. She reminds me to go back and look at those facts about why I'm doing what I'm doing, and that really helps too.
Yeah. Kind of piggybacking off of that, I'd love to hear more about both of your own experiences with imposter syndrome. Ruth, you've mentioned that you've experienced this, but kind of what that's looked like for you. Have you experienced it maybe at different career points? And if so, how did it really show up?
I think so. When I first started at my job at Higginbotham, they brought me on as a training and education person. So I'm teaching insurance to people. And in my mind, they didn't bring me to teach, they brought me to find a subject matter expert to teach. And my boss sat me down and he's like, what are you doing? You're here because I want you teaching. I don't want you finding somebody else. I hired you for your skills. And it really brought it home. And even though I've been doing this for several years, we're expanding our team and we're hiring someone new, which should be a good thing, right? That's great. We're doing great in our job and everything's going good. But that voice, that crazy voice is like, they're looking for someone to replace me. I'm not good enough and I'm being replaced. And I have to interview the person that's going to replace me. Absolutely insanely crazy. And you just have to stop and pause and be like, is that right? Is that the reality as it is, or is it my mind going nuts? And it's absolutely my mind going nuts.
For me, I can say it's tied to every major transition I've ever had. There's always that moment where each new level resets your confidence temporarily. More responsibility might increase your reflection, and knowing that that's part of leadership growth is really important. Otherwise, it can get you stuck in a spiral. But early on for me, it looked very much like over preparing because I needed to be sure of every single thing. Mid career, it kind of shifted to feeling pressure. I needed to have the perfect answer before I could respond. So it looked like me being kind of quiet until I knew the words that I was going to say had impact. And then as your visibility grows, it starts to quiet down and it feels a little bit more like you're carrying responsibility versus skills that you do or don't have. And your confidence more or less lags behind your growth until your results catch up. So it's feeling like you're always running a race. And the first time I really noticed that this was my pattern was I was in a training class where one of the things we had to do was put together a puzzle, and I am not a puzzle person. And I looked at the puzzle pieces and went, "Oh my goodness, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm out." Like that was my first response. Like, no, I can't do this. I can't do this. And after the activity, we were debriefing, and the facilitator said, "How does this show up? Your first response? How does it show up in your life?" And I thought, oh my goodness, my first approach to everything new is, oh my gosh, I have no idea how to do this. And what helped me through that was starting to track my outcomes instead of my emotions. And once I could see the patterns of my impact, I was able to replace some of that feeling uncertain with the facts of what I'm able to do. And I also recognize that when I'm faced with something new, I am someone that needs to pause, take a step back, and look at the whole picture before I respond to something, but knowing that about myself has been very helpful.
I love that you're talking about over preparing because I think when I first started teaching and doing training sessions, I was in a class one time and somebody asked me a question, no clue what to say, had no answer, and I just kind of made a joke and went on. But after that, every single class, I brainstormed what questions could they possibly ask me. And so I had like a whole other notebook of questions and answers. Like that's not realistic or a good way to manage my time. But I remember doing that. And I've talked to other people who felt the same way instead of just having that confidence to say, I don't know. Let me find out and get back to you. Because you feel like you have to be absolutely perfect and on your game all the time. And it's a weakness if you admit that you don't know something. Because then that voice is like, told you so. I told you you didn't know that. Why are you even doing this? When that's not the case.
I think the biggest facilitator or trainer unlock is when you don't know and somebody tells you at some point in your career that you can just turn it over to the room and say, "What do you all think about that?"
I love
And
that.
and it's a huge unlock.
It is. It's like these are the secrets that you don't learn in a class or a setting somewhere, right? You hear that from somebody you admire, and I'm like, just do this. I also love about how you said you journal, you kept a list of your outcomes. I have a win file, like a diary of all the good things that happened. I'm like, I did this. I saw the light bulb moment in season today, and that is a good thing that makes me realize how capable and how much I've grown. I love that.
Another piece of that is not having to be the first to respond once you do know the answers. So giving the space for the people in the room so you realize that you have the answers, but you don't have to respond first.
As a learning leader, your organization looks to you to close skills gaps, meet compliance standards, prepare your business for the future, and more, which is a lot of responsibilities, especially for a team of one. That's why we created Tia, your AI-powered training industry assistant. Tia is upskilled on training industry's vast library of resources, including research, job aids, course content, and more. Use Tia as your guide for tackling any L&D task. By becoming a training industry member, you'll gain access to Tia in addition to becoming a part of the membership community, where you can connect with like-minded L&D practitioners and experts. Driving the business of learning can be challenging, but remember, you don't have to go it alone. Try Tia today for just $30 per month. Sign up at trainingindustry.com/membership.
I want to talk a little bit more about when you are in these moments, imposter syndrome and having those doubts. Could you share some strategies or mindset shifts that you personally use to kind of help you overcome those moments?
I think for me, I stopped trying to get rid of my doubts and started listening to them to see what they were telling me about myself and the things that I value. I think when we're tapped in to what value it's attacking in us, it can sometimes give us a lot more information. I use an internal sequence, which, full disclosure, I'm writing a book about imposter syndrome. So I'm calling it the rise shift. And it is recognize when your thinking has moved from problem solving into rumination, because until we recognize that that's happening, it's really hard to do anything about it. Interpret the story that you're telling yourself, because we're really, really good at making up things that we think other people are thinking, and we do it on a regular basis. And when we get in front of a large group of people, we're always like, what are these people thinking of me right now? And then shifting to that more accurate evidence-based view of yourself and those outcomes that you took stock of. I'll call them your receipts. So keep receipts for those great things that you're doing so you know when you have a doubt, and then experiment with the kinds of visible actions that you have done or that you can take. And that keeps you moving forward, even though uncertainty is present.
That's amazing. I love that. I can't wait for your book to come out. I think it's so important for me when I see myself having these doubts. The number one thing is I talk about it a lot. I am I told my manager, I told my team, I'm like, this is something that I see. I see in the industry. I see people having this. And I will admit that this is something that I struggle with sometimes. So everybody's on the same page. So my manager knows if I go to her and say, I know this is crazy and I know this is not true, help me work it through it. She knows where that background is coming from. I think a lot of people in the learning and development world don't talk about it because if they talk about it, is it a weakness? Are they admitting that maybe those doubts are true, maybe they're not, but let's just not talk about it. Let's just shove it under the bed. That's also how I clean my house, but whatever. Um, I talk about it and I let people know, and I do have a folder of wins. I think that's really important. I also keep every single certificate I've ever earned. And when I'm feeling like I'm not qualified, I just kind of flip through it and be like, oh, I did this and I did this and I did this. And it lifts me up.
Those are your receipts, and that's really good. I think it's also important to note that confidence typically follows action, not the other way around. So a lot of times we think we have to do all these actions before we feel confident, but a lot of times it doesn't come first. You do the thing and then you're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Okay, now I'm confident that I can do this. So when we think about imposter syndrome and how we feel or where we don't feel ready or don't feel right, your response to that doubt matters so much more than the actual doubt itself.
Oh, absolutely. I think even like I'm lucky I can talk about it with people at work. But if you can't, if you belong to a professional association or you have a cheerleader or you're in a group on LinkedIn, there are people out there that you could share those thoughts with and get suggestions on how to deal. And I think that's important too, because I think it thrives in silence. If you're not talking about it, if you're not addressing it, it's just like any other fear, right? If you don't address it, it's just going to get worse. And we don't want that to happen.
I kind of want to touch on one nuance here, which is there's sort of this very real pressure that many L&D leaders kind of are feeling to justify their role or impact, especially during times of economic shifts or uncertainty, hearing about layoffs and budget cuts that can create this very real pressure. And how does that sort of feed into imposter syndrome? Are there any ways that L&D leaders can reframe or respond to this pressure in a healthier way?
For me, it's not about showing I so I'm in insurance. And I am not about showing how my training increases sales. I'm about twisting that framework, that narrative, and showing how my training saves us money in E&O claims, error and omission claims, how the training does this. And this is why it's important. So I think once I realized that shift, how it kind of reframed the ROI, it made more sense for me. So I felt more comfortable explaining why my role was important. I don't know if every industry can do that, but I think you have to find a way to make it comfortable for you so you feel good about talking about it. Because I'm not a numbers person. I don't get numbers. I get feelings, but I don't get numbers. So if you're not a numbers person, you have to find some way that you can explain it and feel confident. Because if you don't feel confident, it's not going to go over.
I always joke that in learning, nobody told me there'd be math. And so when we think that measurement or proving value has to do with values that are numerical, it's sometimes scary. And that constant scrutiny can turn into internal scrutiny where you ruminate on things. But when you're constantly and repeatedly asked to prove your value, it's easy to start questioning your value. It's easy to start questioning your work. Because when learning is working well, who gets the credit? It's not you, it's the business. Oh, yeah, the business is doing a great job. When learning isn't going well, the attention comes to you, which then creates some chronic pressure for the L&D person. And when a role's legitimacy is regularly evaluated, people in that role internalize that evaluation, and it starts to shape their identity. And if you think about L&D and L&D leaders, we operate in high accountability systems with shared attributions, and you're asked to show ROI across human systems that you have no control over. And that environment creates ongoing tension, even though we are not in the business of measuring the effectiveness of people. That's my favorite thing to say. We don't measure people. We measure programs. We measure the effectiveness of programs. But measuring the effectiveness of people is a frontline leader's job. We can help set them up for success. But I think it's really important that we shift our language more when we're talking about this to outcomes that are observable. So what was the behavior change? What was the quality of the decision making? How did we grow a capability? How did the performance shift? Because all of that is the stuff that grounds your work in the evidence of what you're doing and that it works and that it matters.
And Ray, being in that role where you're constantly having to prove your value, show that evidence, can create a lot of doubt and imposter syndrome for sure. I'd like to dig in and explore kind of the role of organizational culture in either reinforcing or reducing imposter syndrome for learning leaders.
This is something that I feel really strongly about. Actually, today I posted something about how if you're a carrot and stick type of leader, you should think about whether you're managing animals or people, because it really does matter. Culture shapes how safe people feel when they aren't certain about stuff. And I've seen people thrive in environments where questions were welcomed and feedback flows both ways. Good feedback loops, I can't say enough good things about. But when people are free to admit that they don't really know something or they still have something to learn and it doesn't feel punitive, there's a lot more opportunity for people to grow and thrive. But if you have an environment where expectations are really unclear and things are pivoting, the leader wanted it this way, now the leader wanted it that way. And we know in learning this happens a lot, especially with your stakeholders. Well, that's not what they wanted. They didn't know what they wanted until they saw what they didn't want. But some of that inconsistency, and then that leads to never really getting recognition, which people sometimes need to do the work well, and constant comparison. Well, Mary didn't do it that way. And, Mary was always our learning person and she just did whatever we told her to. And you can't say, well, Mary was an order taker, because that's not going to go over well. But where we have environments where we can make our contribution more visible and partner in a way that sets up that frontline leader for success, then we will be able to feel less impostery and thrive more as a culture. But part of that is really clarifying expectations, recognizing contributions, and building partnerships that feel more like a handshake than a handoff in most of our environments.
Absolutely. You have to have a space where you work that you feel safe to ask questions, to say, I know this is how we've always done it, but what if we try this way? I think a lot of organizations love to say they have a culture of learning, but they really don't, right? They just slap that label on there and keep going. But if you have a true culture of learning, we know that sometimes we don't succeed at the first time. And that's not a bad thing. We didn't fail. We got experience. We learned a way that didn't work, but you have to be somewhere that appreciates that and lets you grow. If you don't have room to grow as a learning leader, it's not good, right? You're like Mary, who becomes the order taker and just does whatever. We want to be able to grow, but we got to grow in a safe space where we get that encouragement, where we get that feedback, where we get the good job, you did this. That's so important.
I think it's really important for us to recognize that clear signals help people trust the place that they are. And for our people who are searching for jobs right now, and there's a lot of them out there, if somebody is telling you, well, we have a really good learning culture here, the coach in me wants to push you to ask the question, can you explain what learning culture means in this organization? It will probably open up a lot more conversation.
Uh-huh.
And remember that interviewing goes both ways. It's not just them wanting you, it's you wanting to work in an environment where your skills are valued and you can grow and develop.
100%. We've covered so much ground today, and I'd love if we could close things off by offering some tangible advice for L&D professionals who are sort of stuck in this cycle of self-doubt. Do you have any advice or tips for people in that position and really how they can move forward with more confidence?
I think the number one tip for me that I would give anybody is find a person. Find someone you can talk to. That has been so successful for me. Find a cheerleader, someone who has your back, and they can give you the good and the bad, right? Maybe your concerns are valid, maybe they're not, but they can help you separate the two. And I journal a lot. So writing it down, my wins, even if they're small, a win is a win. And that really helps me. Those are my two big takeaways.
I will say yes. And keep in mind from a systems point of view that L&D is a field that changes really quickly, but it also stays the same a lot. So there's a lot going on, right? We've got AI, which is changing a lot of things. And then we have organizational changes that change things, but the basic backbone of L&D hasn't changed a lot in a very long time. Uncertainty is part of our role, but how you interpret it really shapes how you function and how you lead. So I'm going to challenge everybody listening to treat their initial thought as information first. And I'll give you kind of 3 things that will be helpful. The first thing is when you have that imposter thought, I want you to tell yourself, I'm having imposter thoughts, not I am an imposter. Don't attach that thought to who you are as a human being, because that's not going to help you or anybody else. It can send you quickly into a spiral. The second one is keep that record of your outcomes. Even keep records of the things that you influence. Today, I had a really good meeting where I influenced this stakeholder to change the way they were doing things because I knew it was better for the performance of the team. And then the third one is I want you to consider taking action before you feel like you're ready to. Again, confidence sometimes comes after you take that action. And if you take that action, it might be an opportunity for you to sigh a sigh of relief and recognize how great you are.
Well, that's a great note to end on. Loren and Ruth, thank you so much for joining us today. How can our listeners get in touch with you after the episode if they'd like to reach out?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn, connect. I love connections. I love messages. I'm always on LinkedIn posting about learning and development, training, insurance, my cats, whatever. So reach out, connect with me. I'd love to talk more.
I'll say the same. You can reach out to me through LinkedIn. You can reach out to me through the WeLearn website. If you're somebody that likes reflections, I pretty much post something related to leadership with a reflection on a daily basis.
Awesome. Well, for more resources on this topic, check out the episode description or visit the show notes on our website at trainingindustry.com/podcast, and make sure to subscribe for more timely episodes like this one. Until next time.